I think the main demand of large organizations with regard to the energy transition and to the climate technology startups is access to new business opportunities and business models.
In this podcast, we do talk a lot to experts for regulatory developments and frameworks, to representatives from large organizations and associations. One thing we haven't dived into really with depth yet is the significant role of startups as a driver for the sustainable energy world. So in this episode, we want to find out what significant role they are playing and what they need to be successful and thriving with their contribution to a decentralized energy supply with renewable energies. Because the path from an idea to a successful business model is a long one, and a fundamental issue for startups often is finding investors. So stay tuned to find out everything about the startup angle on our sustainable energy world of tomorrow. Welcome to the Smartery podcast, a podcast for and with the creators of the new energy world. A world in which energy will be renewable, decentralized and digital, bringing together electricity, heat and mobility. Let us show you how we will get there and who will get us there. I'm very much looking forward to be talking to my guest for this episode because he actually can cover two angles, the corporate side of the energy industry as well as the startup side. He started on the corporate side, having covered senior executive positions at RWE, for example, or Energy or E.ON. And now he's turned sides and is working as managing partner at Future Energy Ventures, a venture capital platform that brings together corporate partners and world-class startups to shape the energy landscape of the future. They run hubs in Germany, Tel Aviv, and Silicon Valley, so he can also give me a global angle on the issue. Welcome, Jan Lozek.
Hi, Zach. Thank you for having me.
Now, Jan, as I mentioned, you actually worked on the corporate side before. You changed over or you swapped sides. Is that your personal testimony that startups actually do play a significant role in the energy transition, especially in decentralization?
Yeah, absolutely. If you just a few words about my past, I'm not going now to quote my bio, but when I've started with 18 years to become a professional with university and all this kind of stuff, we had this huge start of the energy transition. And that's something which I'm working with since I'm in the business, since the early 90s. And if you really think about the energy transition in a broader scale, it's really about new innovations to decarbonize our planet, isn't it? And who produces all these innovations in the world that are startups? So if you think through what is really needed for the energy transition, it's a lot of innovations, a lot of startups and new technologies and enthusiastic and visionary people to make that happen on one side. On the other side, if you think about what we wanted to innovate, we wanted to innovate the energy system, which is a huge legacy system, which have been developed in the last decades and even more time. And what it means is you need to bring together two types of groups. One is the large corporates with a lot of legacy and a lot of experience how to run a global energy system. On one hand, and the other hand is you need to bring to the table all these possible innovations we need in order to decarbonize the planet as quickly as we can, and the enthusiasm and the passion to make impossible happen.
Now, as you mentioned, you started 20 years ago. So a lot of startups you might have seen back then when you were actually focusing on your corporate path might be already a medium-sized or even a large corporation. So where do you draw the line between a startup and let's say, normal company? And also in terms of the internal quality, what distinguishes a startup from a company in your view?
What we do at Future Energy Ventures, we are really focusing on young startups. What we call them Series A or B, that are startups they already have developed the technology with a certain product market fit and with a couple of employees, and that's a small company, I would say. They don't have a long history, they don't have a large experience. Usually, the companies we invest into, they're 2, 3, 4 years old. And if you look then into more mid-sized companies, even in our portfolio, we already have mid-sized companies, which were small companies 6, 7, 8 years ago. These companies, they have a 3-digit million euros of revenues, 100, 200 million euros of revenues. They have 100, 200, even 1,000 employees. So they're a much bigger system, which you need to manage and organize and lead differently than a smaller organization, than a startup.
Now, you mentioned that you focus on Series A and B, and just for everybody who's not familiar with startup slang out there, that references the stage they're in regards to funding. So how often have they actually gone out there and asked investors for the next amount of funding? So that's very early, actually. Now, when we look at the startups you work with, also the startups you see out there, what unique opportunities but also challenges are energy startups facing when really focusing on a decentralized energy grid?
Usually the startups are quite young, as I've mentioned earlier, and what especially startups need to reach out to us, it's funding. No, first and foremost, they need a certain amount of capital to bring their solution to the next table, and I think that's one of the biggest challenge, which young founders always estimate. And usually, it's really important that you reach out from the very first beginning, when you already make up your idea, when you start to staff your team and move forward into the next direction, to reach out to the right people to get access to this capital pools you may need in the future to grow your solution from small to bigger to mid-size, and then even to a unicorn, maybe on a stock exchange. One other topic, especially with regard to energy, is business expertise. So it sounds really cool to set up a lot of renewable business and connect everything. That's a good story to have, isn't it? And that's what we wanted to achieve. However, it's really difficult to get all these different energy sources into the legacy energy system. So you need someone who really understands the system, how it works, how to connect, how to organize. You need a lot of business expertise you usually don't have just developing technologies in the first extent. And then I think the third topic is access and expertise with regard to software technologies and technologies you need in order to combine, to organize to business. One thing which is also really important, and you may already hear why it's important also, that energy startups connects to large corporations, is market access. So access to customers, how to sell your solutions, and so on and so forth. And I think just mention one more, and then I stop it for now, and then we discuss it maybe further with other questions. It's the most important sort of young companies is talent. And you shouldn't underestimate how important it is when you start your startup that you have a team which is diverse, with different experience. Diverse is a nice name, no, but it's also a challenge. So really set up your team and have the right team that you can make it to the next level, I would say. And team and talent is the most critical challenge all of the startups have.
Because obviously it's a hot topic and qualified members and qualified talent out there is rare. So I guess you're competing with a lot of startups for that very rare talent. You also mentioned, of course, it's never too early to start looking for funding. I mean, it's an extreme case, but here I'm based out of Hamburg, the home of 1,5 Grad, so one of the German unicorns. And I think they went from almost a sort of like idea to unicorn in 2 to 3 years. So absolutely fast, incredible fast. I guess they really made the right choices early on even. And I guess also an angle that you mentioned that I heard out is that the sooner you talk to investors, the sooner also you get a qualified feedback on if your business model is actually attractive to investors. So it's sort of like an iterative mode of going forward. I think what's really interesting also for this podcast, and that's also something where I guess you have a unique expertise in, is corporate partnerships. I guess access to potential clients, to customers, is something that you can get specifically as a B2B startup if you have corporate partnerships. Now, what sort of benefits can these partnerships bring about also for companies? What can both sides learn from each other?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think the main demand of large organizations with regard to the energy transition and to the climate technology startups is access to new business opportunities and business models, because it's maybe not obvious, because we always have energy when we get at home and there's light and we play music and can watch TV and whatever. However, the system is changing entirely, no? From a central monolith large system to a decentralized system. And decentralized system means a lot of smaller system that changes the entire business model of large corporations. And that's why they wanted to have access to startups, to innovations, to young teams, to really learn and see what's possible, what can be changed, how scale certain business ideas and products in the market. That's the most thing large corporations are looking for, just getting access to the new business for them in future, in order to not to get obsolete in the future. That's the main topic here. And on the other side, if you look at the startups, they really wanted to understand how the system works, how to organize, how to connect 100 PV systems into the energy system, how to manage then energy flexibility using energy trading markets, and all this kind of problems and topics you come up with, like a company 1,5 or Termondo, a company from our portfolio, really practical advice and access to the system in order to grow and to scale your solution.
You already mentioned that, for example, you are investing in Termondo. Now, I guess generally it's fair to say FEV is focused on investing in energy startups, but that is such a broad field. So do you have a specific investment strategy or a focus area?
Yeah, absolutely. If I'm talking about energy, most of the people, they just think about, as mentioned before, just energy at home and maybe for electrical cars. What we are thinking on our side is that the energy system will change tremendously. So what we understand as a future energy system, that has mainly 3 buckets. One is the classical energy system we briefly touched already. That's the growing more PV systems, organizing the energy system differently with decentralized solutions like 1,5 or Termondo is doing that. But it's also about digital tools for large utilities to organize, to bring all these smaller energy systems into the larger energy system, to use more renewable sources or to manage more efficiently their systems. But there's a second really important topic, which is mainly a hot topic also today. It's the entire building space. So we are investing a lot of capital into companies which helps buildings to become net zero, which are helping to optimize the cooling, the heating, the energy flows, which really brings renewable systems into buildings so that we can help buildings to become quicker, less carbon intensive. And the electricity system in future is not only buildings and the energy system we know today, it's also about the electrical transportation, isn't it? So we're also investing into the space of the electrical transportation and e-mobility and software solutions, which really helps to then cars to connect to the energy system and maybe sell at night energy, or in the morning when we start our day, energy to us.
Now, the areas you covered, electric mobility, specifically the building sector, it's obvious how necessary it is to transform those sectors. I mean, the building and living sector alone covers 40% of all CO2 emissions. So it really is necessary. And I guess founders out there are very convinced that their solution is a unique puzzle piece for to solving this riddle. But if you do not look from a technological perspective or a stuff we need to get done perspective in terms of climate change, but you look uniquely from a venture perspective, what is required in an energy startup to be attractive for an investor or as a venture opportunity?
Yeah. I would say there's no difference from any other startup in another sector. First of all, you need to solve a big problem, isn't it? You really need to tap into a market which is immense, which attracts investors, talents, and so on and so forth. And then we tackled already with your previous question the topic, what's really the challenge of startups. We also tackled what's really important to solve in the very beginning. So to have access to the right people and expertise to help your startup to grow. So create your ecosystem, be part of the ecosystem, collaborate with other startups, looking for people which wanted to be part of the innovation in a certain sector or area where you're part of. And then I'm coming back to, that's always the main theme on young ventures or first-time ventures. It's talent. You need really to make sure that you have the right capabilities in the team. And I think here's a difference to the classical venture capital or the other asset classes in the venture capital sector. With regard to energy, it's more complicated to innovate. So you need to be even more experienced in the energy sector, and you need to have the right skills at hand with regard to the energy expertise here.
Now, what we do talk a lot about here in this podcast is obviously the role of regulation for the energy transition, because it's one of the main roadblocks often, or one of the decisive guidelines that enable or do not enable change. So specifically in regards to startups, are there favorable regulatory frameworks you observe out there globally? Are there changes in developments that are particularly relevant for startups?
I don't want to shy away from your question, Zach, but I think there are three elements that are really important for startups, and you need to see them as a system, as a coherent system. And it's regulation, it's investors, and it's the economy. And just explaining what I mean. So first of all, with regard to economy and going back to 1,5, is you need to have the economic of scales. You need to create a product with a perspective to get profitable, really profitable product in future. And 1,5, they tapped into this PV systems, which is a highly profitable product already today. And that's why they are unicorn. So you really need to understand the economics of your product and your solution. And if the economics are there, you can buy it cheaper and sell it more expensive to the market. Then you have a great opportunity. And that's really important. And there's no regulator which can change that economic principle in the very end. The second thing, which is really important on the other side, is the investors. And you may hear a lot about ESG and the metrics and all this type of things. But this is really important on the investor side, that investors have the right framework to invest into energy, climate technology, CO2 emission reduction technologies, isn't it? And that's the second part of the puzzle. And the third thing, and all three things needs to work together, is regulation. So regulators need to help and to set incentives to move into the right directions. But regulators can't do that for 50, 100, 150 years. They need to fund and or to organize and to support systems which on the long term gets economical viable and attracts private capital. So regulation has an important role for young startups to start off, but in the very end, it needs to have an horizon where economics and the investment markets buy into your story.
So whatever the regulation is, startups really need to single out where there will be a future profit and market to be found. Now, just for everybody who's not familiar, because we mentioned it so often, 1,5, it's a German-based startup. They're also operating, I think, now outside of Germany in several countries, and they specialize in really enabling private or end users to get PV on their rooftop as fast as possible, and also I think by now connected to home storage and to participate in the energy market as such. I think Termondo is on a similar route. That's one you invested in. Apart from Termondo, do you have a specific success story you're particularly proud on with FEV, and why so?
Yeah. Termondo, it's really an amazing case. Termondo is the market leader in heat pump installations in a German-speaking area here in Europe, and they're also now scaling to other markets like 1,5. Really exciting case. You usually invest in teams which are small, like 5 to 10 people, and they have less than €1 million of revenues. And Termondo is really big now, so that's a huge success case. They're the three-digit million euros revenue size already. And another case from other sector, it's a company which is called Virta. Virta is the fastest growing e-mobility system installer from Europe. It's a Finnish company from Finland. We invested into the company a couple of years ago when they were quite small, with few million euros of revenue, and now they're growing year by more than 100%.
What exactly are they doing in e-mobility?
What they're doing in e-mobility is they're designing and selling EV charging infrastructure to EV charging operators globally. And then they help to operate that system. So they provide the app you usually have when you drive your car and you wanted to get the electricity. But on the other side, help then the organizations to organize and administrate the software system you need to settle the transactions and so on and so forth.
Now, in my humble opinion, I think that probably also is a crowded area. I guess a lot of startups are focusing on that. So they seem to be doing something right in terms of their team and the talent they attracted and the way they have their business model set up. Because if you succeed in this field, you certainly know what you're doing, because a lot of other people are trying to do the same thing. Speaking of which, now that is e-mobility. Of course, billing is a big thing, energy management systems. So are there some areas that are particularly interesting for startups to focus on?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of areas you should or could look into. What's already, I think, a huge area a lot of startups are in, but it's quite important, is the topic of energy flexibilities. So think of you have a PV system, I have one, and all your hundreds of friends and the people from your university and so on and so forth. So there are thousands of energy systems out there that need to be connected. And if we connect them and bring them to the energy system, we could create a lot of flexibilities, renewable flexibilities to organize our energy system more efficiently. And that's a multi-billion euro opportunity. That's think about how many renewable assets currently producing sometimes or need to be stopped because they can't be onboarded to the energy system. So that's then really an untapped opportunity, and that's really important with more and more EV charging and PV systems in the space. That's one thing. The other thing, just coming from the very other end, is if you talk about ESG becoming a CO2 neutral, net zero, that also means we need to be able to measure, to organize CO2. We need to understand CO2 as a currency or a CO2 market or however you name it. But we need really to organize that system better. It starts with and started with a couple of years ago with creating transparency, so understanding how much CO2 we really use, what's happening. And the next big opportunity is really to manage, to organize, and to create the markets for trading that. And the largest, I think, problem in the current CO2 market is trust, because there have been created a lot of systems, but there's no system which is really trusted or trusted to an extent that everyone would like or can use it already today. So it's a huge opportunity here as well. And then just mentioning the last one, I think if you talk to this PV installers and heat pumps installers right now, the most important problem at homes and at buildings is currently to connect everything. So to connect the heat pump with a PV system, with a car, and with your local energy provider. And we could do that better, more efficiently. That's also a great opportunity right now in the market.
So, Jan, to me that sounds like the energy market or the energy transition as such is not a field that in the soon future will be dominated by one central player. Like you, for example, you have Amazon for retail, you have Google for search engines, you had Tesla for electric mobility. I think now they've just been overtaken actually by BYD. But it sounds like it's more like it's a big cake and a lot of pieces to be distributed. You might have a single area, such for example, heat pumps or home PV, where you have like a small handful of startups or companies that might dominate the market, but it's not as such a field that one player can capture.
Absolutely, Zach. Just two data points or 2 points for giving more flesh to your argument. One thing is, the last couple of years we invested each year $1 trillion into the energy transition, e-mobility, and all the topics we touched in our conversation. What we need per year to get to net zero is 3 trillion, 3 to 5 trillion in the next few years. So 3 to 5 times higher. So there's a lot of demand for solutions which helps to get more efficient, to get the carbons out of our systems. That's really one thing. And we need all together until 2050, $180 trillion. So it's an unbelievable huge market.
So it's a huge market, a lot of untapped potential. Hopefully, a lot of startups will tap into that potential and in best case, jointly together with corporations and partnerships, because that's really the fastest way to transform the system. If you have the innovators working together with the legacy companies, sounds so diminishing, but I mean like established companies, because they're the ones who actually run the system as it is, and they need to be on board to transition into the future. Thanks so much for joining me today, Jan.
Thank you, Zach. It was nice.
Are you the founder of a startup that is working to advance the new energy and e-mobility sector? Then you definitely should secure a spot at the Smarter E Europe, Europe's largest alliance of exhibitions for the energy industry. All information and conditions of participation for the startup area can be found via the link in the show notes.